All right, I'd like to welcome everyone back and actually give you a big thank you for coming back within the 15 minutes. We're now going to start our panel question and answer session. We have a number of experts, as you can see up here, from all the different offices within the National Archives to address different issues that you might have related to the presentation that Susan gave or general Capstone issues overall. I'm going to introduce each one of them, and then each one of them is going to give a short description of what it is that they do and their involvement in this policy and how they may interact with you and your agency going forward. So first is Susan Sullivan, who gave us our presentation on Capstone here at NARA. Next is Kevin DeVorsey, who is in charge of our electronic formats team within the Chief Records Officer organization. And he is here from New York City, so we'd like to say thanks for coming down on the train. Next is Bob Spangler from the Research Services Organization, and he is one of the technical experts that will be working with agencies to actually get the permanently valuable Capstone email into the National Archives and make it available. Next is Hannah Berkman from our General Counsel shop, who not only helps us think creatively about Capstone and its implications and talking to agencies about it, she also helps keep all of us from going to jail. So a big thank you to Hannah on a daily basis, and a public one as well. And then we have, who's next? Jill. And Jill is going to talk to us about, from the policy perspective, the development of the Capstone policy and the work that we've been doing to get that piece done. Also, Jill Hudson plays a big role within our shop in getting records management regs through the process, again, working closely with Hannah so they're appropriately seated next to one another. So we can talk about that. And the last two folks at the end of the table here, I want to make sure we give a big round of applause for Meredith Schreiber and Sean Curry, who are the appraisal archivists within our organization, who, for those of you who have them as your appraisal archivist, I would like to say thank you for your patience as they also do Capstone for the entire government. They've been doing a lot of great work, working with the different people that are on this panel, getting slideshows ready for presentations that I do, and kind of thinking through how the training for Capstone needs to occur. So I'd just like to say thanks to the entire panel, but particularly to Meredith and Sean, who do a great job of telling people like me where to be, when, and what to say when they stand at the podium. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panel and take it away, Sean.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, or good morning, I think it still is, right? My name is Sean Curry, and some of you might recall that I was involved in a lot of the training that we did back in 2013. My primary role within the National Archives is that of appraisal archivist, so I do work with a lot of agencies, some of whom are here today, Social Security, NSA, Department of State. But I've also been involved for about 2.5, 3 years now on the development of Capstone, specifically working with Meredith to come up with training events like the one we have today. So my role on the panel today will be able to hopefully answer any questions that you might have on Capstone generally, and specifically about scheduling and appraisal of Capstone records.
Hi, and I'm Meredith Schreiber, and Paul kind of introduced a lot of what I'm doing already fairly well. But I am an appraisal archivist. I work with a lot of the intelligence community agencies and State Department, a lot of the same agencies as Sean. And as Paul has mentioned, I've been working on Capstone for several years now. I was on the bulletin development team, and we're essentially in charge of doing the ongoing Capstone activities for the rest of the fiscal year, any training, informational sessions that we can come up with. And we're actually also working on the potential GRS development for the Capstone approach. And so hopefully you will be seeing and hearing from us more.
Hi, I'm Jill Hudson. I'm a senior records management policy analyst with the National Archives. I work in Paul's shop. I have been involved in Capstone since, I guess, the first ideas of it came around. I was on the bulletin development team with the rest of my policy team, as well as Meredith, Sean, Hannah, many others. And as Paul said, I've also been working on doing regulatory review for Subchapter B for records management regulations, and it's pretty much, what I've been doing the last year.
Hi. Here we go. My name's Hannah Bergman. I work in the General Counsel's Office here at the National Archives, and I answer a lot of questions related to records disposition, the Federal Records Act. So we've been just advising on Capstone issues for several years now, working with one of our colleagues who is now retired, Jason Barron, if those of you who know him. So I'm here to answer any of your legal questions about what's an appropriate disposition time, how we arrived at some decisions, what litigation risk you might face because you're now disposing of records sooner than you would have, or you're keeping them longer than you would have, or how Capstone sort of changes your calculus in that regard. Or just in general, you can always reach out to me when your general counsel's office is asking you questions that make no sense to you as records officers. I'm here to translate things, so.
Hi, I'm Bob Spangler. As Paul mentioned, I work for our research services organization within NARA. I am not an archivist, I'm not a policy person, I'm an IT specialist. So I always kind of describe myself as a fish out of water at NARA. But so my interest in Capstone is technical mostly. Strangely, weirdly, I really like email. Most of my background is with running operational IT before I got to NARA. Running operational IT email systems within the government. So I'm really excited about Capstone, and my role, the role of my group, is going to be to kind of serve as a bridge between, the policy has been promulgated, the policy will be understood, but we have this sort of seedy underbelly of actually doing the technical work that has to be done. And that's where my group is going to step in. So providing a bridge to you as the agency people in understanding how Capstone will be implemented technically, and then turning our attention into the processing archivists and the preservation specialists at NARA to understand how the email that comes in under these various formats is going to be processed and preserved. So I really like the Capstone idea, and I like the work that it presents to us. So I look forward to working with many of you on this project.
Good morning. My name is Kevin DeVorsey, and I'm an electronic records format specialist. And I've been involved with Capstone pretty much from the beginning, as Jill has. Simultaneously, as Capstone was being developed, my team was working on revising NARA's transfer guidance. And obviously, email is one of the formats that's included in our transfer guidance. So it was kind of a symbiotic relationship. We were able to see what was happening with Capstone in terms of bringing in email for individuals and take that kind of into account as we were developing the revised transfer guidance. And so we have done that. The existing guidance that's been up for the past 10 or 12 years is very much focused on individual messages coming in as a markup language, recognizing that through Capstone, we're identifying kind of bodies of emails relating to an individual. We've been able to include new formats that allow grouping together large numbers of email and export out of a number of systems. Listening to Susan talk, it reiterates how complicated email systems can be. We don't have the ability to go through and do guidance for every email system that's out there, so we put this kind of broad guidance in the hopes that we're providing options for people to output email and so that we can bring them into NARA. So we've worked very closely with Bob in trying to make sure that what we're putting out in the transfer guidance makes sense. And I'm looking forward to putting it to the test and seeing how things go.
I'm Susan Sullivan. I think you probably already know who I am by now, but I just want to say that it's been such a pleasure working with every one of these people at this table in implementing Capstone. And I want to put out a special shout out to Hannah Bergman, who's been sitting in every one of our meetings and has been one of our best advocates. As a records officer, the role of the General Counsel cannot be underestimated.
So we designed this panel to be your time. So we would very much invite you to let us know of any questions you have, either about Susan's presentation that we had earlier today, or basically any questions you might have about Capstone generally, or email generally. And we do have some helpers here who will help get the microphone to you if you have questions. So let us have it. Got some hands.
Hi, thanks. Do you know approximately what percentage of your email is managed outside of the system?
We don't know yet because our Capstone is so very new, but as Susan mentioned during her presentation, and we also highlighted last year, we do estimate that a small percentage of our email will still need to be print and filed for case files, et cetera. Those of you that were in the sessions last year might remember that Meredith and I used the example of our appraisal dossiers, where probably less than 1% of our email as temporary non-Capstone officials will still likely need to be declared permanent and associated with a related case file. So that is definitely a conversation that each of you at your agencies are going to need to have. But to come up with a number at this point, speaking for myself, it's going to be an incredibly low number, but I think it's going to vary from employee to employee across the board.
Hello. Troy Manigault from Department of Energy, Records Officer. My question is with regards to the controls that are allowed by the user. How do you manage that? Is it a single off-on button where they want to participate or not participate, or is it incremental? You mentioned, Susan, I think you mentioned in your presentation they had an ability to control.
Yes. Let me clarify that a little bit. The way we have our system set up is so a user doesn't necessarily even need to go into the ZL Unified Archive to manage their email. If you're familiar with Gmail, a lot of people have their own personal accounts. There's a labeling capability in Gmail. You can apply a non-record label. You can apply a permanent label or a temporary label that the crawler will act upon. So that's how that's accomplished within Gmail.
I also think it's important to know that I think what each of you will need to do when you get back to your agency is determine what level of control your IT will allow. We're very lucky at the National Archives where we can actually program the system to allow us to have the 90-day safe harbor period, so users still can, if they choose, go in there and manage their email. But we designed Capstone to be very broad because we know some agencies, frankly, may not have the IT, the technology, the email system to allow that level of control. So when you go back to start talking about whether Capstone will work for you, I think one of the first questions you need to ask is what can your current IT system do in terms of allowing that type of control?
I also think it's important to realize that our IT systems are set up so that if you're like me and you do absolutely nothing except delete the crap, then that's totally fine. Like, it's not sort of, you don't have to actively participate. There's a default. If you're super organized and you're like Meredith and John, because you're an archivist, you can go ahead and follow all the rules about labeling and great best practices. But if you just really want to delete your crap, that's fine. The system will still work.
Dixon Jesorobo from CFPB. I currently manage the email system. I just have a general question. The agency is about 3 years old. Our email is already about 4 terabytes. And if we grow at that rate, it's going to be very difficult to manage. What actually constitutes a record? For example, if I send an email between 2 persons, I need to meet you for lunch. And people are not deleting those sort of email because they're afraid they don't know what the guidelines are. So what actually constitutes a record? How do you know that each email should be a permanent record?
I think your question is actually exactly why we have Capstone. We know that users today, before we had Capstone, were using email for all kinds of informal conversations like that, and they weren't applying records management controls to it at all. So we have situations where agencies will have large bodies of email that include a lot of non-record material. Under Capstone, you're going to have at least that disposition date sometime in the future, so everything for a temporary account can be destroyed at once. Using NAR as the example, we chose 7 years for that. Other agencies may choose to use a number that's much lower than that. The other beauty of Capstone is, and this is what we're doing at NARA, it still does allow the users to make that record, non-record decision if that works for your IT and if it works for your internal policies and comfort level. So for example, at NARA, The way we designed our system, I can still delete those emails that are about having lunch or those that don't actually make it to the level of being a federal record. But on the other side, as Hannah said, if I don't delete that, it's just going to go along for the ride in my Capstone account, where eventually it will be destroyed at 7 years, which is better than what we're seeing now for agencies that have been using email for 20 years, who are keeping it for decades. So Capstone is actually designed to actually give us a better way of managing email in those situations.
Good morning. Ivan King from the Department of Energy. It's a very quick question, but I heard you mention earlier, Susan, with regards to using Gmail as the chosen email platform versus Outlook or some other system. Can you speak, if you will, in terms of how that plays out in terms of the requirement of having a .gov email address, or some of the challenges that may have come from using Gmail in a cloud environment versus using Outlook?
I really can't speak to those technical issues. That's something that our IT department had to handle. And there's Google Apps for government, so there's a part of Google that is set up for government clients, and I'm sure they've addressed all of those requirements in that package.
This might be a good point for me to talk about the specific. I talked a little bit about the work that we intend to do. So how will we do it? And Kevin mentioned that I work quite closely with him. Kevin developed the format guidance. So what formats are acceptable for transfer? And so the open question is pretty much what you asked. Okay, I understand what you're saying about about the acceptable formats, but this is my implementation. Either I have an Exchange server, Outlook, I use Gmail, I use maybe Lotus Notes, something else. So our hope is to develop technical addenda to the guidance that will give agencies guidance about, okay, this is what you have, you're implementing Capstone, these are the formats that you're trying to comply with. We want to come along and help you understand exactly what you need to do from a technical perspective to export, to make the email available under Capstone. So we're not quite sure what form that will take yet. We can't be experts in every single email system and archiving back end that's out there, but if we can get a handle on them, the predominant technologies that are out there, and provide guidance that really gives you sort of a cookbook approach, do these things as you go, that will give you a big leg up on complying with Capstone as we go forward.
And one thing, in early December, Google with Gmail installed an option where you can output email in inbox format, which keeps together all of the folders and brings all the email together at once. And that's one of the formats that's in the revised transfer guidance.
So Stacy Strayer from DEA. I had a question concerning the ERM specialist position that you guys generated for, again, to support this program as you're moving forward. The question is related to how does it align with OPM and the fly sheets that are coming out for the new records series position, et cetera? Any comments on that?
I would say it doesn't align yet. I would hope that they get more in line in the future with the comments that we've submitted as part of the review of that fly sheet. We have a long way to go as far as identifying the IT expertise that's needed in records management. And when we were putting that together, we were hoping that maybe it could end up being an example for some agencies to use in the future.
Federal Election Commission. Miriam, I believe you mentioned that you're working on a GRS schedule for Capstone. For smaller agencies, I'm sure a lot of us, our ears picked up when you said that. Could you give us some more information about that?
Currently, we've been working on since last fall to see essentially internally if we could come up with some type of GRS that we thought could, roughly be applied for most people as far as that scheduling component is concerned. We're still drafting it. We're still talking internally. It is moving along. We have high hopes for it, and we're hoping that it would maybe come out sometime the end of the year, maybe end of the FY, something like that. But ideally, it would be broad enough to allow, agencies to kind of apply it without, pigeonholing people. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I should add to that. Is there?
Well, I mean, the other thing I'll add is a lot of us who have been involved in general Capstone are now involved in the GRS development. Hannah, myself, Meredith, some folks from Jill's shop, et cetera. One of the challenges of any GRS, and you can imagine it with Capstone, is coming up with a definition that will fit the wide range of agencies that are out there, the small agencies, the large agencies, intelligence community, military, civilian, et cetera, et cetera. But this GRS will be like any other GRS, where eventually it will go out for comment from you folks. So we are very committed to making this a priority as we move forward. In fact, we have I believe, a 5-hour meeting tomorrow to talk about the GRS. So we're moving very, very hot and heavy with it. As an aside, you do not need to wait for the GRS. As Susan mentioned, the National Archives has already submitted a schedule for their Capstone approach. We are aware of other agencies that will likely do the same. That is perfectly okay. Your appraisal archivist will work with you about that if you do want to develop a schedule. And just kind of as a little aside, we are hoping that as more and more agencies develop Capstone, to have more presentations like we had today. So for example, if another agency develops Capstone, we're going to invite them to give a presentation. We're also going to start getting sample schedules up on our website. For example, now that National Archives through Susan's shop has submitted their schedule, we are working very hard to make that available to you as an example of what a schedule might look like. So we're going to keep you posted on a lot of these developments as we move forward.
But we're really hoping, as far as the GRS is concerned, or potentially submitting a schedule, we're hoping that that's the easy part for you guys. We don't want that to be the hard part or the headache part, because there's a lot of components that go into implementing this approach at your agency. And so we want you to be able to, focus your time on that. And then, when it comes to actually getting the disposition authority, that's the easy part. Either we'll have the GRS to just hand to you, you can just apply, or that, the schedule will be easy, and we'll have maybe some examples already out there that can help you out with that.
And a different follow-up question. We put together an interdisciplinary senior level team to work on the Capstone approach. And we came up with what we thought was a workable system for us to capture our email records. Is there anyone that we can speak to run our approach by from a technical perspective? Here's what we're thinking. Do you think that will meet the requirements?
What we can do is, I don't know if you've been in contact with your appraisal archivist yet?
We have talked with her. We also have an ongoing relationship with NARA consulting staff.
Okay.
When this first came up, the requirement for the Capstone, we actually spoke with the consulting staff, and they said, oh yeah, we know all about that. Guess what we're doing? So we sort of had an inroad to it, which was very nice.
Okay.
But from more of a technical perspective, that's what we're interested in.
So I would say at that point, if you've, started to do a lot of the back end first, I would obviously say talk to your appraisal archivist first, and then, see if maybe we could just get a meeting and see if maybe we can either put together a telecon or, actually go and visit. We're very open to doing those types of meetings if you've got very specific questions and you're in the process of working with things. But that, so talk to your appraisal archivist and see what we can offer. We're hoping, we are going to put this, we're taping this session today. We're going to put that up online. We've got a couple other short briefings that we're putting together that we're going to push out. So we're hoping to have additional things out there that we're hoping will help people. Some of it will be a little bit more technical, but if it's really kind of in the weeds and very system specific, then that would definitely, I think, call for an additional meeting.
Thank you very much.
I'll just add to that. I think that sort of technical evaluation would be the sort of thing that my group would be interested in doing. We would do it through agency services, through the appraisal framework, so you're not talking to different people and different perspectives, but that would be the kind of thing that we'd like to participate in.
Hi, my name is Rachel Vera. I'm from the Department of Labor. I wanted to ask, were they limits set to the user accounts on how much information they can retain a year through the fiscal year for your audiences?
Google imposes a limit on the size of a mailbox. Was it 25 gig?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something 20, 25 gigabytes. It's very large. And that's a total limit that we're just letting people use however they would like.
So my name is M.A. Primo from the Securities and Exchange Commission. And I'm thinking about your the emails that need to go into case files. Susan, you said that it was currently print to file is your policy. I'm assuming that this is going to change over time and that there will be some sort of either like a user decision that this needs to be, retained for X numbers period of time, or maybe there's a rule. My question was sort of thinking about the directive and managing permanent records, electronic records in electronic format. How are you thinking that you're going to change that? Will it be user-based or rules-based? Because we're going to have a lot of those kind of questions at my agency, and I'd like to know how you're thinking about that.
That'll be part of our overall ERM strategy, which we're formulating at this point. Of course, you have to have a repository identified and the policies and everything behind that, but it's all part of what we want to do with that. That said, I think a rules-based approach is preferable, but there needs to be some optional user controls available if necessary. So that's kind of the direction I'm thinking we're going to go with that.
I would add in the transfer guidance, we also identify formats that are good for individual messages and so that they can be maintained in an electronic form. So we kind of, if you're outputting an individual's entire body of email, you look at these formats. If you're just looking at individual messages, look at these formats.
In addition, one of the sort of benefits of implementing the ZL Unified Archive tool with email is that the first thing that we're putting in it is email, but it has the potential to expand to all of the things, right? And so depending on what your strategy is going forward, maybe you're just managing your email, you're doing something else with another system, or maybe you want one system that answers all your questions. Think about it that way.
Hi, Bruce Bailey at HRSA. Do you deduplicate it all, or do you keep everything absolutely for the 7 years? And given your amount of individual records management categorization, what is your policy to present a defensible disposition or a charge of spoliation?
So we have the journal file, first of all, and the journal file of the email is going to capture everything that's going in and out the door. And we can put a litigation hold on that journal file if there's any reason to believe that folks are not following the appropriate disposition authority. We come to realize that a manager has done something horrible. We have an EEO complaint. They've deleted their email. It's going to be there in the journal file for a while, for at least a year. And we're going to be able to execute the hold on the journal file, go back, get that information, take appropriate action, right? What was your first part of your question? You had two questions. Deduplication. This system does do some back-end consolidation so that it's only storing like half the message once, essentially, with pointers to boxes. Did I say that right?
Yeah. I mean, that can be accomplished through the email system itself, the operational email systems. Mm-hmm. Many of them have single instance storage. And ultimately, for preservation, we don't want to store duplicate copies of everything. So depending on the native email system, the source email system from whence the emails originate, export methods, our preservation methods, we will get to the point of single instance storage before we do permanent preservation. But I think there's a range of technologies that would implement that throughout the life cycle and depending on what specific email systems are in place.
I'm going to ask a question. This is Rich Noble from NARA. Susan, when you said, the selection of the 48 positions for NARA, did you survey their emails at all to see if they warranted permanency?
We based our decisions upon their positions and functions in NARA.
And so the assumption is just, is there any way to test over time maybe whether they're really producing emails that are validly permanent?
That's one of the capabilities of our system is we can do all kinds of analysis on the data if we want to.
Right, but the fundamental premise is that because this person created that email, it is permanent no matter what its content is. So the idea that you're testing it is just, it's like a false concept. You're accepting the premise that the COO sent the email and thus it is a permanent email no matter what it's at, assuming it meets the record threshold.
I'll ask one more. This is different subject. Did you say, Susan, that the NARA system is capturing calendar information as well? I didn't think that was part of Capstone, the calendar information. Appointments. It is. It is part of Capstone. Okay.
And to be clear on that, that is included in their submission of a record schedule. So the record schedule that was submitted by the National Archives does make it clear that this is also going to be for calendars.
The approach itself is really focusing on email, but there's obviously other functions that might be, with your email system that you might need to account for. So you need to think about that. So Susan, included the calendar. She included chats, I believe. There might be one or two other things. And so you really need to think about what your system is and how everything's connected, because maybe it doesn't make sense to divorce the two if it's really all, connected in your system.
My name's Greta from TTB. We're a Bureau of Treasury. And I'm wondering if it could be possible that there would be no position in an agency that's just a bureau like mine, that there would be no position that would be all permanent, or would our administrator definitely be permanent? So I'd like to know a little more about your decision about how you determined those 48 positions, because maybe no one is permanent.
Well, General Counsel leads our determination of that based on the positions in NARA. I would think, though, based on what you said, that the administrator's records would be permanent. If you look at your existing record schedule, you would probably find that the records generated out of that office are permanent. I guess that depends.
One of the things we're working on with the GRS is coming up with that minimum definition of who might fall into that capstone category. So your question is one that is very much on our mind right now. So we're going to be looking at the GRS and testing it against a lot of different agencies to see what would that actually equate to. For some agencies, the same definition could be 1,000 versus 1 or 2. So we're really going to be looking at that. For agencies that submit an actual capstone schedule, don't wait for the GRS. Part of our conversation, if not majority of our conversation, is going to be on exactly your question. Are we picking too many people? Are we picking too little people? And where do we meet in the middle? And this is where I think the appraisal archivists and the agencies are really going to have the majority of their conversations. Meredith and I, as appraisal archivists, have already been having these conversations with our agencies, so it's definitely something we're prepared to talk to you about.
So this is Troy Manigault, Energy again. You had a proposed disposition of minimum 7 years. How are you going to define that? Is that across the board, or individual programs will define it? How will they do it? Otherwise, will your emails ever really go away if you're just saying at least 7 years? What is the cut point, and who's going to decide that? Otherwise, at least 7 will be forever.
If the 7 years is approved, the email management system will do it automatically upon the date on the email. It will act on the date of the email. It will be an automatic deletion.
So all the email will be in a repository. When the clock starts ticking the day the email is sent or received, and then in 7 years, it auto-deletes.
So it's an
Period.
actual cutoff and delete at 7? Because I thought it said
There's no
minimum
cutting off.
7.
Right, the schedule says that. Well, the authority is different. I mean, you want to have the authority to keep stuff longer should you need it, because that's sort of how we write schedules. You want to have that built-in flexibility for various unforeseen reasons, but the system is designed to implement it the 7-year.
Okay, which goes back to the control point I asked earlier. So someone can actually decide to extend that minimum 7 at their own decision, or where is that made? At a policy level?
No, a regular run-of-the-mill employee cannot decide to extend the 7 years on the records repository. We could issue a litigation hold because there's some pending reason to keep those records for longer. But if individual users want to keep a convenience copy for a time period different from the records management disposition, then they need to do that in their live inbox.
And this is an interesting conversation because it's not just about Capstone. We approve a lot of schedules now outside of Capstone that have the banding. Keep no earlier than 7 years, but no longer than 15. But the expectation for any schedule like that is that back at your agency, you are then setting policy that is going to pick what that number is. But as Hannah said, and this is very important, having the schedule in place with that band allows you to revisit that policy without coming back to NAR with the new schedule. So regardless of the schedule, whether it's Capstone, whether it's any kind of record, if you're approved with that banding, 7 to 15, 7 to 20, whatever it is, best practice is you're still setting that policy on your side. Now, in addition to that, we've already spoken to some agencies who may want to tier their Capstone approach. You know, the National Archives doesn't fall into that category right now. But I've already spoken to agencies who might say, you know what, this level of employee, we don't need this email more than 3 years. This level of employee, we don't need it more than 7. This level may be 15. So Capstone has been designed to give you that flexibility. We just then need to back that up through the scheduling process, whether that's the GRS or an individual agency schedule.
Good morning. Amy Burks with Transportation. I had 2 questions. The first coming from the council perspective and knowing that most email has sort of disappeared into the ether for the most part. Are there any new policies or user training regarding sort of what's appropriate to put in an email or how to mark emails that may be sensitive, first of all? And then second of all, coming at it from a FOIA perspective, 7 years seems like a really long time. What were your considerations in getting there?
So we did do an interim guidance that talked about appropriate use of Google Apps for government, right? And remote working and all of those things. You know, I really worry about people who work from home and keep their stuff on their personal devices. That's a huge litigation risk. I do not want to be in a position where we're going to be asking you for those devices so that we can do discovery. That's uncomfortable for everyone. No one wants that. So we have a policy that says, don't do that. Please don't do that. Please, if you're working remotely, do everything within the Google environment. Use the docs, use the calendar, use, you know, the spreadsheet function, or remote into our systems and use the remote access for the office tools. Because the risk there is pretty significant. I mean, otherwise, one of the things that we saw a lot with our old unreliable email system was there was the 1 day or 3 days when it didn't work at all. And so then you're using your personal email because you have to function, right? And so now we're not seeing, hopefully, as many people who need to forward things or use a personal email, right? But it's also a matter of having clear guidance in place that says, if for some reason everything's down, you have to use your personal email account or your personal computer to do work, you need to make sure all of that gets back into our systems. Yeah.
Just to clarify, I was thinking less about using personal than in the question of using appropriate banners or whatnot in an email, particularly in terms of our permanent executives who may get CC'd on all kinds of discussions.
Yeah, that's just a risk. So we certainly do have good banners in place, right? You want to have your standard Einstein monitoring banners. DOJ will tell you all about that. as will DHS. But no, we don't have any sort of, well, you're an executive and you're creating permanent email, so now you need to think about what you write. I mean, there's no guidance like that. I do sort of hope that all executives are aware of the way of putting things in writing. I think FOIA is one of the best tools for making them aware of the risk of putting things in writing. And you know, a lot of records, in terms of FOIA, having a central repository and ability to search the central repository sort of at large does away with a little bit of the sort of, oh my God, there's all this stuff that it's now FOIAble. Well, yes, but we can actually execute the search. And then they're electronic, and then we can redact them electronically and produce them electronically, and no one's going to a paper file cabinet and using a magic marker. So you see a lot of realization of efficiencies in that regard.
And I think part of this goes back to what Susan said, which I think is really important, which is what training will be required within your agency. It could be as simple as just making sure that everyone is aware that you're now using this new approach to capturing email. Even some of our most basic training classes we have out there talk about the dangers of putting personal stuff into an email and how if it's mixed with official business, it defaults to record status, et cetera. And it also brings us back to the importance of what Susan talked about for the NARA adopted approach, which is that safe harbor period where those executives still can delete or remove the purely personal, doesn't rise to the level of a federal record material before official capture kicks in. So there's a lot of issues at play here, the policies, the training, what rules do you have in terms of allowing them to apply some of that traditional records management before capture that will help reduce the risks that Hannah brought up.
And to the extent that you're going from an email system where you had no journal function, no sort of automatic capture, no monitoring of any kind, and then you're migrating and you're changing that, I do recommend you think about sort of your labor relations consequences. Different agencies are structured differently. They're going to have different sensitivities. Good training, good partnerships in that regard are important as well.
Hi, Stuart Brown, NIH. My question has to do with the gaps between the record schedules that would exist within Capstone under your model of 7 years, and if you have the informational value of that information for those records would be maybe 3, 4, or 5 years, that FOIAbility, e-discovery, risk, and how that's managed.
You just
If
have
it's
to take a
managed.
big, yeah, I mean, you have to take a big breath and think about it, and basically accept the risk, right? I mean, are there things that you would have disposed of at the 3-year mark that are now going to be there for 7 that present some level of risk to you? Is it an acceptable level of risk? Is banding more appropriate for you because of that? Or is it really going to sort of wash out in terms of, well, keeping this information a little bit longer just makes our position more defensible, though we're going to have to search and produce that. I mean, I think it depends sort of on what type of information you're talking about and what your agency looks like. But
Manage the risk.
Right. You
Accept
need
the
to manage,
risk.
right. You have to accept it and manage it and just not sort of know that it's going to come. It's going to come up. This is a thing you're going to face. And
Hi, my name is Wing Long. I'm from OSC. As I understand it, Capstone is a role-based system. And I was wondering how you handle a user with multiple roles.
Well, if they have a role of a senior official, that's going to be the defining role. I don't think it'd be very common where you're going to have someone that's a senior official that's also doing something else that's not producing permanent records. But in our system, that person can actually separate their emails by using labels and filters to identify their temporary emails outside of their role as a senior official.
do you have an example?
Yeah, let me give you an example. Okay, for example, let's use my head of the agency, the special counsel. She works on the case. We have a case management system. and electronic case management system. The email goes to electronic management system. Does she need to retain a copy in her own individual mailbox, or does it just need transfer the message from her own inbox to the electronic case management system?
That depends on how your system's configured. I guess, are you, so if I have a case,
You work with a
and I
case.
want to have a case file about that,
Yeah, electronic case file.
right, an electronic case file.
Right.
In a perfect world, my electronic case file is going to be in the same repository that my Capstone email is going to be in.
Well, well, in a very perfect world, you're right.
Right.
But then what happens is, in a real world
Yeah,
like ours,
okay.
is not.
So I think that goes to sort of my disorganizational tendencies, right? So I'm just going to have 2 copies of that email. I'm going to let the Capstone policy manage the email that's in my inbox via the default rules, because as we said, I only delete the crap. And then I'm going to theoretically, I would note that all my supervisors have gone to a meeting. I'm going to print that email and I'm going to put it in a folder in a drawer somewhere.
But
Or
it's-
I'm going to put it electronically.
But
in a
it's,
separate repository.
we're moving towards a paperless system. I mean, paperless office.
Right.
Everything is paperless.
So you're going to put the email in 2 places. So you're going to allow the Capstone rules to take it by default to that one place where it goes. And then you're going to take additional user-based action to put a copy in the case file.
So Hannah, can I jump in here?
Yeah.
So I'm Rachel Bon-Tompkins, and I'm also an
Please.
appraisal archivist. So we have this problem with our appraisal dossiers. An agency submits a schedule, and we do work with the agency and their emails. And so this is the example of the print and file that we're doing right now that Susan talked about. I'm not a Capstone official. My email is temporary. I print the email that needs to go into that dossier that shows an exchange with an agency, like we made a change on a schedule and we all agreed on it. I'm not going to flag that email as permanent because I've put it in the case file. What we're doing, though, is we're building a system within SharePoint so that we can start to manage our case files electronically. And we're going to come up with a way of then putting those emails into that case system. But it's going to be the same thing. I'm still not going to flag that individual email as permanent to be captured under Capstone in our email record keeping system because my case file is permanent. But that's temporary person. If I was a permanent person, there would just be 2 copies of that email, one in the case file and one in the permanent records. So it's not going to be perfect.
That's my question.
Yeah, that's okay. There can be copies.
Okay,
more
wait,
than one
wait.
copy.
That's okay. Let's assume we use your method. We're going to keep 2 copies. One is in the individual's mailbox, and one is in the case file. It's on the case file. What happens if there's a litigation hold on that case file, including the electronic record, electronic mail messages for that case file? So with the user's mailbox, will be deleted in 7 years. Let's assume you're using Capstone, default 7 years, deletions there. So you actually are violating the record management law, right? Because you deleted a litigation hold
So
message.
when you put a litigation hold in place, you're making an exception to the disposition rule, right? So as a policy matter, you can put that hold in place just on the case files, or because you know that your employees aren't putting all their email correspondence in the case file, you can put it on both systems. That's a policy implementation issue.
Okay.
You're not, because you're putting a litigation hold in place doesn't mean that you're violating the Federal Records Act, right?
I'm asking. I don't know. That's
Yeah,
why.
it
That's why I'm
doesn't.
here.
It does not in
Right,
any
okay.
way. I strongly encourage you to
Okay.
always comply with all court orders related
Right,
to
right.
litigation holds.
That's why I asked this question
Right.
here.
Yeah, you can have those 2 worlds functioning. It's
So
okay.
actually, so it's legal. Okay, if I implemented what we call a policy that the messages will go into 2 places. Okay, so I don't worry about flagging my message in my inbox for litigation hold.
You don't have to, but if
don't have-
you,
right,
but
that's
if
why I
you're
gotta
in
make sure,
charge,
right?
if you're in charge of an IT system within your agency, and if someone comes to you and says, "I need to put a litigation hold in place for this body of records," right? And you know that as a practice, your employees don't file in two places, don't sort of make sure everything goes into the case file, then you need to sort of you need to put the litigation hold on the live system as well, right? That's just sort of a matter of good government practice, understanding that, you're trying to make reasonable determinations about where things are. You don't want to be in contempt of an order because you destroyed records. You don't want a spoliation inference. Those are all separate decisions that your counsel's office should be managing, sort of in terms of risk, implementation, and where things are within your systems, right?
I want to make sure that my policy, the IT policy, is going to meet the government-wide regulations.
Right. I mean, that's an area where you really need to work closely with your counsel's office to talk about how your systems are structured.
Thank you.
All right, another follow-up question about basically the retentions. I'm really curious about the convenience copies that people are allowed to keep in their inbox. And is there any governance rules or policies in place that limit how long they can keep those? So a head shake now.
Until they get to 25 gigabytes, which is the Gmail system limit. So they can keep stuff until their system is full.
So potentially there are records that could be maintained that are sensitive indefinitely with no controls over making them go away when they should go away.
Correct.
It's important to add to that your policies that you do at your agencies could be different than our Capstone policies within NARA. One of the things we're
the National Archives. We're not regulating nuclear reactors, right? Like, this is a little bit different calculus than, every agency needs to make that decision themselves.
Correct. So that's the main reason we designed the Capstone Bulletin to be so high level, because we know there are going to be more agencies that are more heavily litigated than others. And we want to empower you as an agency, if you do embrace Capstone, to develop those policies that work best for you. And we can certainly talk to you about what those policies might look like on your side from a best practices standpoint. But everyone needs to understand that the flexibility of Capstone is to allow you to develop those control policies on your side that work best for your business and legal needs. It could be different for every agency that's represented in this audience.
And I mean, if you think about it, depending on the state of your technology right now, that might be what's already happening, right? So if you don't have a new control in place for that, you're just continuing with the status quo. Yes, over time your risk might increase, but we're really not changing the game too much.
Suggestion that each individual agency can set up their retention period. Is there a status of limitation for e-discovery? For example, if I set my years not to be 4 years, and I have a FOIA request or litigation, can I say, sorry, my retention is 3 years, I don't have anything beyond that?
Right. So the most statute of limitations related to the government, I'm making a gross generalization here, typically you're going to see a 6-year statute of limitations on a claim. Gross generalization. That does not mean that all records have to be kept for 6 years, right? So travel records are kept for 3 years. Let's say the government, roughly, again, gross generalization, right? Let's say I falsify my travel and I'm paid for travel that I shouldn't have been paid for, but someone doesn't figure it out they figure it out sort of 4 years from now. But the records that they need to prosecute that claim, under the claims collection rules, they can still come back and get me for that, right? But those records would have been destroyed 3 years ago per the schedule. That's okay. There's a schedule in place. The records were destroyed pursuant to the schedule. It's totally defensible. If they can pursue the claim without those records, good for them. If they can't, then no records law has been violated. Obviously, fraud is a problem, but you haven't violated the Federal Records Act. Does that make sense?
Status of limitation for records. If we could tell them, sorry, we don't have that record anymore.
You can absolutely tell someone, sorry, we don't have that record anymore because we followed GRS 23 and it had a 4-year retention and that record would now be 6 years old. That's a completely valid answer to any question. Unless, of course, there was a court order in place or you had reasonable anticipation of litigation and should not have destroyed the records.
Good morning. My name is Dawn Houle. I'm with the National Indian Gaming Commission, and we are recently, soon to be, I guess, hiring a records management specialist. So I put that out there for anybody interested in coming and working for us. But most importantly is we're updating our IT system, and it's about 10, 12, 18 years old. I don't know, we're only 18 years old, but I think the system is at least that old. Who at NARA could possibly guide us on all of this migration of, like my inbox alone is 35,000 emails. We have political appointees, we have presidential appointees, and we have to retain those 18 years worth of appointees. So we have a volume of email migration as well as IT upgrades. Is there somebody, Bob or Kevin, might direct us to assist us with this project?
Being relatively old myself, I'm intrigued at looking at an 18-year-old IT and email system. So
you should see our phone system.
I also think that retroactive application of a capstone approach to your legacy email systems is something that sort of we're just struggling with in the GRS world, but is an issue we're dealing with. And so how you would go about doing that, if it's even possible, depending on how your systems are structured, is something we could absolutely have a conversation about. You should go through your appraisal archivist.
Yeah, I would talk to your appraisal archivist first. You should.
She's raising her hand right there.
The appraisal archivist is right there. So talk to Kate Flaherty, and she can start the conversation with you, and then she can talk to probably a slew of us, and we can figure out maybe what conversation needs to take place and how we need to go from there.
What Meredith and I have been doing as the appraisal archivists on the Capstone development team is we've also been providing training to our fellow appraisal archivists. And part of that's going to be how to pull in other people from this larger collective into conversations at an appropriate time.
LaShawn Dozier, Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Earlier in the previous presentation, you all kind of touched on cloud computing, so I'm just wondering if you could just kind of give me a quick snippet on that. And then also, with the technical guidance that's forthcoming, will there be any type of recommendations or considerations that we need to kind of, look at a little bit closely as it relates to privacy or IT security?
I will say in the transfer guidance, the transfer guidance is very broad guidance that applies to all federal electronic records coming into NARA. So we worked with the General Counsel's office, and we do have some kind of boilerplate language about culling personal information and non-record material as it applies to all records. And so, we can't do step-by-step if you're using Gmail, if you're using Novell GroupWise, if you're using Outlook, and there are differences in the way all of those things work, but we do try and reiterate the message of, Capstone is saying bodies of email, but you probably don't want to transfer those birthday invitations, so.
Yeah, I mean, the transfer guidance does say essentially agencies have an obligation to sort of say when there's a body of records that's going to be restricted, that's coming into our collections, that you let us know that because there's a lot of B6 information, privacy information in it, or you know that there's a lot of PII and you haven't done screening or you have done screening. We certainly encourage culling of non-record personal content or culling of things, social security numbers from things that don't need to have them in them when they come in, that sort of stuff. We like cloud computing. What did you have a specific question about it, or? Oh, right. So all of the Gmail, the Google Apps for Government is all hosted externally in government clouds, basically, all within the continental U.S. And then the ZL Unified Archive is a separate cloud, same deal.
I would say, email is an interesting thing. There are good standards that define what makes up an email message when it's in transit between two systems. Once you send it, your system does something to it, and the recipient system might do something completely different in terms of blowing it up. In our transfer guidance, we try and define, what are the things that make an email message an email message. It must have a to, it must have a from, it should have a CC if somebody was BCC'd. And that's all very important information. And so we try and lay out, here are the things that you need to be aware of regardless of your system, if it's a cloud system or a system installed on a local server. If you're migrating old email, here are the things to keep in mind to keep it an email message. I know if I go into our Gmail system and open up one message and print it out or save it as a PDF, if somebody was BCC'd, I don't see that. So we try and lay out, that's an important thing. For me, that would not be a good way for me to save my email, to keep it in the form that it's truly an electronic message.
Hi, my name is Regina Martin from Social Security. And my question is, it sounds like you have a journal repository that has all the emails in it, and then you have the inbox as well. So when the emails are deleted from the journal repository, will it also delete the emails from the person's inbox? No. Okay, so essentially you still have a whole set of records.
Sort of only as a last ditch effort, right? So we then have, let's think of it as 3 containers. I think that's how I think of it. It's really actually 2, but whatever. So you have a live Gmail inbox. All the email is there. You have a ZL Unified Archive crawl box, which has email that has been crawled from the Gmail inbox with extra metadata. So it has labels that were applied to it. All the BCC information, all that stuff is captured, right? But most importantly, it has the labels. So, and then you have a third repository, which is the journal. And that is just sort of, as it hits the server, a copy goes over here, and it has no extra metadata that the end user would have added to it. So you can take separate disposition actions on each of those bodies. So the Gmail live system, we let people do whatever they want with until they reach their maximum capacity, and then they have to figure out how to get back under the capacity. The crawl repository is where Susan does all of her back-end work in terms of executing the dispositions, where we do the 7-year versus the permanent, et cetera. The journal has a rolling disposition, which will hopefully be 1 year from the day, right? Like a rolling 1 year. Every day's journal file will be deleted when it reaches 366 days, theoretically. That's not technically sort of an accurate representation, but it's conceptually what's happening.
So if the user marks the email as permanent,
yeah,
then that would go in that ZL crawl, and that would prevent the disposition after 7 years. But they have to mark it as permanent. So does that mean at the end of the 15 years that it goes in as a permanent record?
So, yeah. If I'm that person, any of us on this panel, we're all temporary people. If for some reason we have a permanent email, and we've labeled it as that, yes. It goes into the crawl, it goes into the permanent file plan, the permanent file plan goes into the National Archives. Right. Now, practically speaking, I'm never gonna do that because because in our office, the general counsel is a permanent official, and I cannot fathom a situation where I would be creating a permanent record that I'm not copying him on.
That you're not copying?
Like I'm not CCing him on, right?
Oh.
And so he's getting a copy, and his email is managed as permanent. So I don't need to do anything because I know that it's in the permanent bucket there.
Okay, but you as a user, if it's something you want to keep more than 7 years,
Then I need to keep it in my Gmail box.
and just make sure you keep it cleaned out enough that you can keep it.
Yeah, I mean, 25 gigabytes is a lot of email.
So you as an attorney, do you have to go look at all 3 repository? Well, I guess you would just look at the 2, the ZL and the Gmail. To place
For
litigation
like a
holds?
discovery, we actually have some folks in our IT office that we say, these are the search terms, this is what you would need to do. And they do the search across the ZL, the crawled file.
So you wouldn't look at their inbox?
We wouldn't unless we had some reason to know that they're gonna have information in the inbox that wouldn't be in the crawl.
Okay. And then last question, sorry. If you mark something as permanent and then you decided it wasn't permanent, can you go back and change it from permanent to temporary?
Only within the safe harbor period. If it's outside of the safe harbor period, they can come to corporate records management and ask for the administrators to do it.
One of the things I'll quickly mention is I mentioned that Meredith and I are involved in getting more training and more tools available for you. We have an email management page that's now on our website. If you follow the link for records managers, you're going to see right there a link for email management. We are going to be adding more and more resources to that page, including some of the documentation that Susan Shop has created for the implementation of our Capstone approach. Statement of work, requirements documents, things that might serve as an example for you to see what we did at the National Archives while you start to think about or design your own Capstone approach. So we just wanted to let you know that we're still thinking and adding more and more resources to that page that we're hoping are going to be valuable to you guys as we move forward.
We've also spent a lot of time talking about what happens in this repository of email. The Capstone is designed to work no matter what you have. So if all you have is a live email system, you can make it work with that. Don't think that we're trying to say you gotta have this awesome 5015 compliant thing and this other journal file. You don't. You can really make it work just on the live system. There are different risks that you're gonna associate with that, but it's totally doable. Yeah, it's very customizable. I think we probably could, but if you want to shoot us an email, not off the top. I honestly cannot pull that off the top of my head, but I do think that we are capable of sharing costs with other federal agencies. But if you want to shoot us an email, we can do that.
Well, with that last question, I'd like to thank the panel and give them a big round of applause for the questions. Or actually, thank you for the questions and thank them for the answers. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today, and we'll have more sessions like this in the future, not just from NAR, but from other participating agencies. So please reach out to us if you'd like to participate in the future. Have a good afternoon.